The practical uses of asbestos are very numerous. At least 18,000 articles are made of it, ranging from packing for steam engines and linings for friction surfaces to bulkheads for aeroplanes. No, not a member of a secret society, nor a medicine man, but an asbestos shield for firefighting. Asbestos comes into the home in the shape of fireproof curtains and covers, and in a variety of patterns. They are one answer to the problem of the careless smoker. Ash, but no char. If in a playful moment you feel you'd like to make a bonfire of the tablecloth, see that it isn't made of asbestos.
Born from the upheaval of continents some thousands of millions of years ago, microscopic sodium-rich crystals with traces of iron condensed into deposits to become one of the most remarkable natural substances on Earth. Known to ancient European and Mediterranean civilizations, these crystal fibers were very strong and flexible and had a wondrous ability to resist heat and flame, which made it very useful for creating tougher clay pots and building materials. By the Victorian era, asbestos, as it came to be known, was found in mineral deposits in abundance all over the world. Its fire and heat insulating properties made it the focus for new technologies that could be used in manufacturing, housing, and machinery. Asbestos could be used like concrete for fireproof walls, stringy enough to be spun into yarn for fire-resistant clothing, even act as filters for cigarettes. It could be used as a powder to soften hard surfaces better than sand. In the eyes of industry, asbestos was a miracle. It made the world safer, and its versatility could not be understated. But asbestos had a slow to emerge dark side. It was one of the deadliest substances on Earth to humans. Asbestos is one of the deadliest substances to humans on Earth, especially blue asbestos.
And it may have been the age of industry and the age of enlightenment, but if you found a substance that was useful and could be exploited, well, the opportunity was there. And when asbestos was discovered in Australia, it was yours for the taking.
Among the wealth of minerals that had already been discovered in the Pilbara, reports of asbestos seams were circulating around Western Australia as early as 1908. In response, many small-time prospectors had tried and failed to exploit this resource with small mines in the two known asbestos-laden gorges in the Hamersley Ranges. However, it wasn't until 1938 that a young Lang Hancock started the Blue Asbestos Australia Company that things really took off. This operation became the one and only asbestos mine in Australia, and it would only grow from there. He named the location Wittenoom, after a fellow landholder and politician, Sir Edward Wittenoom.
Lang Hancock's Blue Asbestos Australia Proprietary Limited Company was, on the scheme of things, a relatively small mining company in Australia at the time. There was a small workforce of 200 people. They were pitched in tents not far from the mine itself. The mine, however, was digging deeper into the hillside, and blue asbestos was pouring out. This did capture the attention of a much larger company. Not exactly a mining company, but the Colonial Sugar Refining Company, or CSR, became very interested in obtaining the operation for itself. In 1943, CSR, after a deal with Lang Hancock's company, took up management of the Blue Asbestos mine at Wittenoom. CSR then became the parent company to Blue Asbestos Australia, and to increase productivity, they needed more workers. With more workers, you need better lodgings. The idea of a town, a company town, was formed.
From 1943 through to 1947, CSR, in cooperation with the Western Australian Government, had built the town of Wittenoom, postcode and all. Located 11.5 kilometres from the mine itself at the entrance to Wittenoom Gorge, the town of Wittenoom had everything, despite its distance from Perth. It had a cinema, bakeries, hotels, schools, churches, a post office, cafes, even a racing track and an airfield. Everything that a town needed.
Possibly due to Wittenoom's remoteness, not many Australians applied for work at the mine. But post-war Australia had an influx of immigrant workers. Over time, those workers ended up coming out to the Pilbara to work. And because of that, Wittenoom's population boomed, and it was actually one of the biggest towns in the Pilbara during the 50s and 60s. It would be nice to say that Wittenoom's streets were paved in gold. Not exactly. They were paved in blue asbestos tailings. One of the byproducts of underground asbestos mining is tailings. Tailings are essentially the waste product from within the mine, the materials that the mine can't sell. These tailings contained blue asbestos, but not the quality that you could sell on the market. The mining company would simply dig out these tailings, find a place around the mine, and let them pile up over time. Now, the interesting thing is that these tailings had some qualities about them which made them useful. They had a very good cushioning effect. They could be used to dampen the hard surfaces and the dusty surfaces of the Pilbara. So, they got the tailings, they went around the town of Wittenoom, and they laid it out anywhere they could, on the roads, the racetrack, the runway at the airport, the driveways, the garden beds, you name it. There wasn't many places that they couldn't use it in Wittenoom.
This also included the children's playground. There was nowhere you could go in Wittenoom without at some stage stepping on tailings from the mine. Men, women and families come to Wittenoom with the hope of good pay and a chance to prosper. As production in the mine increased, the workers and managers soon discovered that life at Wittenoom and the mine was tough. The reality of Wittenoom's isolation crept in, miles from the ocean, miles from any big city, with not many places to go other than the nearby hills and gorges and the Wittenoom township itself. The mine was everything in Wittenoom. You couldn't escape its influence on everything you saw, spoke and thought about. Hot dry days in one of the hottest regions of Australia, sometimes unbearable humidity at the height of summer, wreaking havoc on one's senses. In contrast, the chilly breeze of winter shivers their hands while picking at the asbestos in the mill. Above all, the one aspect of mining asbestos that made working on the mine site extremely difficult and uncomfortable was the dust. The mine and mill were producing a heavy blanket of dust, asbestos-contaminated dust, and everybody at the mine and eventually the town had no choice but to breathe the dust in. The dust was inescapable, and Wittenoom slowly turned from being a symbol of prosperity to being a drudgery of a place to live and work. But as long as the world needed fireproof and insulating products, the mine would stay in business, no matter the conditions or cost.
CSR were a company that knew how to make money. They've been profiting off their businesses for years. Yep, not a mining company, but, the golden rule. Keep the expenses down, productivity up, and eventually you will turn a profit. But workers were still coming in from near and far. Some stayed there for years with their families or on their own. Others could not get out of there quick enough once their contract was over. Some of them stowed away before their contract was over. All the while, the dust from the mine was thickening around the gorge in the township, and the workers, they just carried on. And if you were getting shortness of breath, wheezing, tiredness, coughing, chest pain, all you had to do was go to the hospital at Wittenoom and see a doctor, maybe get a chest x-ray, some painkillers, a couple of days off, a bit of rest, and if you're back on your feet again, well, you just go back to work. Pretty simple. moment Jim McNulty got off the plane at Wittenoom in 1957, the dust was everywhere. It was noticeable. The closer you got to the mine, the thicker it became.
Upon closer inspection of the mine itself, the dust was so thick you could barely see from one end of the mill to the other. Conditions in the mine were not much better either. Mine shafts were only 1 to maybe 1.5 meters tall, where each miner had to bend over for hours on end trying to dig at the blue asbestos. Filtered face masks were issued, however these were ineffective and policing of the wearing of the masks was scant at best. The dust was just being breathed in everywhere by everybody. Dr. Jim McNulty did not sit down on this new knowledge. His experience with diagnosing asbestos-related illnesses in England was now becoming vital in helping the afflicted miners of Wittenoom in Australia. Through Dr. McNulty, more health specialists became aware of the emerging asbestosis cluster in Wittenoom, and now with solid proof that something was going awry with the Australian Blue Asbestos Company, something needed to be said directly. There was, it appeared, a disparity between miners' health, the Western Australian government's view, and industry regulators. The mine wanting to make money, the government wanting the economic benefits, and the regulators emphasising that a safe workplace has more to do with preventing broken bones than workers becoming ill.
Let's talk about mesothelioma. It is the disease solely attributed to the inhalation of blue asbestos. Once you get a couple of fibres, and let's be honest, it's never just a couple of fibres, they are that small, you can breathe in thousands of them at once over time. Once nestled in your lungs, they fester. They've got little bits of iron in them as well, and the mucus of the body does not break down the asbestos once it's lodged in the lung tissue. This slowly kills you and erodes your lungs to the point where there's almost nothing left, with no space to breathe. Once diagnosed, on average, it's about 9 months before the damage is completely done.
The link between CSR's mining operations and the growing number of Wittenoom residents being diagnosed with asbestosis and mesothelioma was becoming too strong to ignore by health professionals. Health warnings from doctors regarding the contaminated dust and poor hygiene conditions in the mine and mill seemed to fall on deaf ears, even after several doctors threatened to report the findings to the WA government. Wittenoom was clearly toxic, and how long could it last? The health risks associated with asbestos mining was well known by the time CSR took over the Australian Blue Asbestos mine. Asbestosis had proven links to asbestos mining as early as 1900. Mesothelioma was linked to blue asbestos inhalation due to the work carried out by Dr. McNulty and others. As long as asbestos mining continued, the health risks from industry and consumers alike wasn't going to go away. CSR did, however, make some modifications to the mill in a small effort to reduce air pollution. However, the result was minimal and did not reduce the dust circulating outside the mine area and down the gorge. But what happened in the end? In December 1966, 5 years after the first diagnosis of mesothelioma, CSR pulled the plug on their mining operations at Wittenoom Gorge, not because of health concerns, but because of falling profits due to a downturn in the asbestos market. The town didn't empty out immediately. Some residents were firmly embedded and had sown roots in Wittenoom. Over the years, however, the population petered out when in 2006 the Western Australian government switched off the town's electricity supply. In 2007, the Western Australian government delisted Wittenoom as a town,